Welcome back to another episode about wrapping. This is an episode that requires your brain to work a little bit harder because we have to talk about math. Because the Flexbox calculates a lot of things with math based on pixels. So right now we have just used Elementor's brain in order to calculate how wide these boxes should be. But if you want a truly responsive design, then you will need to use some math, unfortunately, but it's just simply not that easy. Because let's say that we have a situation like this, right, where we have 3 columns, and we have a longer word in here. Then if we go to tablet mode, you will see that this is already too big. Sometimes 3 columns is just too big for a tablet. So then what you would want is to have 2 items on a row, and then this one should be on the next row. And what if we have even more items like that? Then we have the same problem. And what if you want a layout like this with 2 rows? You could theoretically just say like, you know what, we're just gonna duplicate this one, but then when you go to tablet mode and it's in 2 separate containers and you're gonna have 2 boxes over here and then one under it, you're gonna have a gap over here because this one starts in a new column. Let me show you what I mean. Let me do that real quick. Like this, because these ones start in a new container. So that's not an option. So this is where you need to start to use wrap. Okay, so if you click on your container and then click on wrap, then you will see that the items will go back to their original size. Because if you would delete something here, you would see that these will become shorter. So this is why wrap is quite challenging because you have to understand width. But I've made it as easy for you as possible with this resource called Resource Flex Grow. I will put a link down below. I already showed this on YouTube in 2 videos, I think, so some of you might already know it. But we need to use a combination of width and grow in order to create a layout like this. So let's try to create our 3-column layout in the same way as over here. So the obvious thing that most people would think is just divide 100 by 3. So every box needs to be 33.3%. Let's just try that first. If we give them a width like that, 33.3, and we do that to the other ones as well. Paste the style, paste the style, but now you see that they don't fit on one row. This is because the container also adds the space between the boxes into the calculation. So how the container works, once the items exceed the 100%, then it will go to the next row. So 33.3 times 3 is already 100, and then if you add these pixels, then it's more than 100. That's why they don't fit on one row. So you need to make them a little bit smaller. So you could like be smart and be like, you know what, I'm gonna put them at 30 and then they will fit, right? And yes, that works, but then they're not aligned to the grid, which is kind of sloppy. So then you can use a combination of width and grow. Okay, let me copy that and paste that to the other ones. And now it works. So even when I start duplicating this one, it starts to work. The first one is going to be 100% because it's on grow. But if I want 6 items, so I'm going to duplicate it 2 times more. Now, as you can see, it's perfectly fine. On tablet, you can use the same logic by, for example, putting the boxes on 45% because that is a little bit less than 50%. And then you can see that it also works. Because 45 plus 45% is 90%, and then the gap in the middle, which is just 20 pixels, is less than 10% of the width of this whole box container, therefore making it impossible to have 3 items on a row. And because we use grow, then the 2 items will grow to the edges of the box container, because Elementor will ignore the grow. It will just look at the percentage width in order to define what element wraps to the next row. But using the numbers I just used is not completely future-proof, because if you decide later that you want to increase the gap, for example, then it might mess up your design, because only having 10% in the middle is not too safe, especially when you have multiple gaps. So you need to be a little bit safer with your numbers, and that is why I've made this sheet. So right now we have used... Let's go back over here. We have used 30%, but it's much smarter to use 25%. Why? Because 25% is actually 100 divided by 4. So you would think that this is where we use 25%. No, we use it on a 3-column layout because 25 times 4 plus the gaps can never be less than 100%, therefore creating a 3-column layout. So even when you start resizing your screen, it will always work because it's the safest number you can use. So let's try it. We're going to use 25% on desktop. I'm going to put these at 25%. Let me turn off grow for now so we can see what's going on. Copy, paste, paste, and paste. It doesn't fit on one row because we still have the gap. Let me prove that point to you. When you put this one on 0, they will be on one row because 25 times 4 is exactly 100. But once you add a gap, which is what you want in most designs, then it breaks. So again, what number did we need to use? Let's go back for our 3 columns, 25. Oh, it's already on 25. So now if you put it on grow and then copy and paste the cell to the other ones, now you will see that we have a 3 column layout on all the rows. Perfect. If we want a 4 column layout, we're going to put it at 20 because 100 divided by 5 is 20. So 5 times 20 plus gap doesn't work. Therefore, creating a 4 column layout. Let me try. 20%. Boom. Perfect. And the reason why these two are bigger, because they don't have enough other duplicates to fight against, so they will just grow as much as they can, even though these are also at 25%. So if I start duplicating this, then this one will become 3 column. If I start duplicating it again, then it should create 4 columns, but I forgot to change this one. As you can see, it needs to be at 20 and now it works. You see, so that is how it works. Let me put it back at 25. Okay, so we now have 3 column layout on desktop, but on tablet mode, what do we want? We probably want 2 columns. So what number should we use? What is the safest number? Here you can see it, 35. Why? 35 times 3 is more than 100, especially when you add the gap. So that's a safe number to use. So I'm going to put this one at not 45 because that's not safe. I'm going to put it at 35. Copy that. Paste. And on mobile, it also keeps the 35, so you should even pump it up to even more. You can just put it at full width on mobile. That's the easiest way, so you don't have to mess around with the slider. Copy and paste that style. And there you go, a 1 column layout on mobile, 2 columns on tablet, and 3 columns on desktop, even when we're having multiple rows. And there's one more thing you need to know, and that is that sometimes you don't have enough containers in order to fill your design. So let's say that you want a 3 column layout here, but you only have 5 pieces of content. Maybe your client doesn't have enough content, whatever the reason is. And you also don't want 5 containers on a row because the content is too big, so you need a little bit more space. So with this option, you can cheat a little bit. What I sometimes do is I just add an extra container in it. I just give that the same kind of properties as this one. So don't forget to put it on full width, go to advanced, give it the same width. Oh wait, of course, that's over here. It's a little bit confusing. 25, and then put it on grow as well. And now it looks good on desktop. Let me preview it, as you can see. And even if we go to tablet mode, then you will see that it works. If you preview it, it will still keep this empty space. And the same for mobile. It looks like it's using up this space, but when you preview it, it actually cuts it off, so you don't have to worry about that. And it can feel like a lot of work to have to use these numbers, but this is actually really easy because what you can see is that 35 always creates 2 columns, no matter on what device you are. Because here on tablet, you want 2 columns and that's always 35. You see, so the numbers are actually quite similar. So if you just remember that 2 columns, whatever device, is always 35, and 3 columns is always 25, and 4 columns is always 20, then you will have most of the things covered. So you just need to remember these numbers, and if you forget it, you just come back to this page. So I hope that it made it as easy as possible for you. If you're still confused about the math, don't worry. Just use the numbers that I've set over here and combine them with grow, and then you will get the same result as this page. And of course, that's the same for the uneven layouts like this. And as you can see, wrapping is a little bit more difficult. It's a little bit more work. So only use it if you have a multiple row design, or it simply doesn't look good on tablet, then you should also start with wrapping in order to keep everything looking good on tablet. I really hope this made sense to everyone because this is a more complex episode than the other ones. In this episode, we have used the percentage feature and grow in order to create layouts with multiple rows like this. But there is another great benefit of using the wrapping feature, and that is reducing containers. I know a lot of you care about site speed, so in the next episode we're going to use a wrapping feature in order for you to use less containers We have to use some math again, but hey, if you want a fast website and it needs to be responsive, then we need to do some work. But again, once you get the hang of it, it will be easy. So let's go to the next episode. Hey, and welcome back to, for now, the last episode of this chapter about containers, layout, and positioning. I think we have learned a lot, and I just want to say that everything you have learned so far will enable you to recreate this whole website in terms of layouts. So that is pretty cool, I think so. And in order to round up, we're gonna go over the main features that we have discussed and what the best practices are, because now I've just given you a whole list of things you can do, but how should you think about container usage when you're building a website? So I just want to go over that quickly and then connect it to the things we have learned. Okay, so the first thing we discussed is about direction. And of course, this is the most obvious thing. When things are vertical, you put it on vertical. When they're horizontal, you put it on horizontal. But if you can limit the containers by using wrap, then you put it on horizontal and you use wrap so that you don't have to add an extra container around the buttons. If there's just one image on the right or on the left, you drag it outside of the container to reduce containers, but it's not always the case that widgets is always better than using an extra container. And I know I have focused on using as little containers as possible, but it's not always smart. In this situation, it is smart because here we just need an image and the image widget is the obvious widget. But many people then say like, okay, Reno, well, we also don't need this container because we could just use the icon box widget like that, drag it outside of that container. So I just made a duplicate. So I mean like this, and then they just delete the icon like that, and then they align the content on the left, and then like, hey Reno, look at this, I saved another container. Because you can style this in the exact same way as this. But I've talked with Elementor, and this seems like a good idea, but it's actually not, because a widget like this has more code than a simple container and two very simple widgets. The heading widget is quite simple. You cannot do a lot, and the same for the text editor widget, and the same for a container in terms of code. But the icon widget also needs code, extra code for that icon, and there's also some view options, and therefore this actually creates more code than having one container with two widgets. And this is true for many widgets in the widget panel because they have so many options, and those will be loaded into the website. So if you have a simple layout like this, then using a container over here is actually better in terms of code than trying to minimize all of the containers and try to do everything with widgets. That's something that I wanted to say because this is not information that you can easily get somewhere, because I asked this directly to a product manager at Elementor. So that's how I think about adding extra containers. A container does not add a lot of code, but of course it's better to reduce them if you can, but don't replace it with widgets that are a lot heavier. Now that that's out of the way, let's talk about boxed containers. I would say for most websites, you want to use the box container, put it at 1120, because many designers that will use XD or Figma will also use the 12 column grid, and then it's just easy to design because all the columns are exactly 75 pixels and the space between is 20. So keep the box container via the site settings on 1120 and use the box container feature for all background containers unless it's a full width design, something crazy like this. And sometimes you also use the box container in order to create a narrow design like this, where you just want the content to be more narrow. Super easy to do, and it's easier than adding padding. For the height, it's the same. Keep using padding instead of using minimum height in order to create height for the container. You don't see any padding over here because I've added a class over here, which is something for the next chapter. But this class just adds padding over here. Make sure you use that unless it is a full height design, so a 100% height design. Then you use, of course, 100% view height. Aligning items in the container is almost always just left or middle, depending on the design. Sometimes you use space between for something creative like this, but for most sections, it's gonna be left align anyways, which is the default. So in my experience, I don't use justify content as often as align items. But for many sections, I don't even use justify content and align items because this and these options are the default, but they don't stretch because I'm using padding and therefore the content doesn't have any space to grow. And in many designs, I also don't even change the element gap because this field is still empty. This is the default value because I'm happy with the 20 pixels that is set up in the site settings. So as you can see, just direction and wrap, and that's it. And sometimes I do use the space between for specific instances where I want to create some space between objects, like over here, or as you can see over here, where these two widgets are pushed next to the side because this one is a loop, which is 100% of the width, therefore cannot move and therefore will not be influenced by the space between option. But I could of course also just put this one on grow in order to push this item to the side. Another important thing to know, using grow on elements, we have seen that in, for example, menus to push other elements away, or in a vertical position, which you see in many card designs. And of course we use grow in order to align our boxes or our widgets to the sides of the box container. Again, this 125 plus grow, 25 times 3 plus the gap is not enough for 4, therefore creating this perfectly aligned design. But this is only the case for static objects, because if you use dynamic content like a custom post type and you just load in the loop grid, then you don't have to care about the percentages and the grow, because here with the loop grid you can just say 2 columns or 3. And Elementor does that automatically, and you could just simply change the gap between the columns if you want to, like that, and it will automatically grow, even though it now goes outside over here, but that is just in this preview. That doesn't happen on the website. So if you have dynamic content and you use a loop grid, then you could just play with the columns over here, which is of course a lot easier. But it's not possible to use dynamic content for everything. I didn't think I needed it here because creating a custom post type is more work than just dragging in widgets. So that's why sometimes you have to use the percentages and then the grow, which again, you can find on the resource flex grow template, which is now also linked in the resource tab, by the way. So it depends if the content is static or dynamic. And you now know that this whole thing with percentages and grow isn't the most easy thing to do. So if you can get away with not using wrap and just putting it in one row, then please do it. Let Elementor do the hard work. But from my experience, that is only possible for designs that have 2 and max 3 items on a row, because otherwise it will just become too cramped on a tablet mode. So when there are more than 2 items on a row in your design, then you probably want to go over wrapping, and then you need to mess around with the width settings. And when things just don't look good on a mobile or a tablet, make sure to use the responsive modes, like hiding items as I've done over here, that do not show up on a desktop but do show up on a mobile. Or change the order, because right here the image is on top and on desktop that isn't the case. Or if things don't look good on mobile for your images, make sure to just change the background image if you want to. And from my experience, this happened a lot with shadows. So just change the image if you want to. And lastly, use custom positioning to put things out of the grid to make it look more creative, because a fully boxed website with no creativity doesn't look that exciting. So spice up your website a little bit, put some things out of the grid, make your menu full width, and create some variety in your design. And that's it. That's all you need to know in order to rebuild this whole website in terms of layout. And I just want to give you some confidence here, because you now know more than many Elementor users, because even Elementor templates themselves are not so efficient. For example, look at this. This is a template that I got from their template library. I just went over here, I went to pricing. Here it is. This is that one. I didn't create this. This is from Elementor itself. This whole website, this is designed and built by me, and it's much more efficient. Look at this. Here, there are multiple containers over here, which isn't necessary. And also, this one is still on box, even though it should be on full width. And over here, you can see as well, they've used a container over here. They didn't need to use that. They could delete that container. And it's actually the same for this one. So you can see you already can build more efficiently than what the Elementor templates provide. And these are the new updated templates, which they proudly presented in their emails a few weeks ago. So I just wanted to say that congratulations, you are now a container pro, I would say. And hopefully it will be even more better with the introduction of the CSS grid, which is the next version of the container which is coming. So I hope that you enjoyed this chapter. I'm now going to teach you how you can set up your design system, which is pretty exciting because this will save you a lot of time. So I hopefully will see you in the next chapter, and good luck with implementing this in your own websites. All right, welcome back to another episode. We are going to talk about single row designs and multiple row designs. If you understand this, then you will understand how things wrap on tablet and mobile. So this is all about responsive containers. We have single row designs like, for example, this one, a single row in horizontal alignment with 2 items in it. But here we have a multiple row design. We have 3 columns per row, but they are our multiple rows. This section, for example, we have just one title over here and then 1 row with 3 items in it. So let's talk about how we create that inside of Elementor. So here I have a situation with a background container, which by default is on vertical, and there are 2 containers in it, which I've already set to horizontal. So when I drag something in, like an icon box, and I duplicate the icon box like that, then they will be horizontal. Let's give them a little background color so we can see what we're doing. I'm going to go to advanced. I'm going to go to background, click on a color and pick one of the colors from my palette, just like that. I'm also going to give it a little bit of padding on the inside so we have some visual space to work with. I'm going to copy that style to the other one, paste the style, and then I'm going to duplicate this. So now we have a pretty similar situation. I'm not going to change the colors, the icon, and the alignment. Those are some simple settings that you can find over here. You know, let's do this. That's an easy fix. Okay, and as you can see, these widgets automatically grow and are perfectly aligned to the grid, because this whole website is set up to be 1120 in the same way as my Figma is set up to 1120, which I explained in the boxed container episode. So this is already perfectly aligned. I don't have to adjust. I don't have to go in here into advanced and then mess around with the width settings, because the Flexbox automatically pushes these items in 1 row, because that is what it does by default. We have 2 settings over here, the no wrap and the wrap. First, I thought that the no wrap was default, because if you go to tablet mode, you will see that they will also be squeezed into 1 row. But once you click on mobile, well, then the items wrap. And for people that don't know what the wrapping means, wrapping just means the items going to the next row. So here we have 3 rows. It automatically puts it under it, which is kind of smart because on mobile we don't have a lot of space. But on tablet, sometimes it gets a little bit too much. I mean, this looks kind of okay, but let's say that we would have 4 columns like this, 4 boxes. Well, then if you go to tablet, well, this is way too small. You can even see, let's say if I make the word heading a little bit longer with some extra characters like this, then it will go outside of the box. So this already doesn't work. On tablet, you probably want 2 columns and then 2 rows, so 2 by 2. And then on mobile, you want them to wrap like this. So it looks like the default is wrap, but if you click on no wrap on this container, then even on mobile, they will absolutely not wrap, and then you will get this, which of course is not good. So that's why I almost never use this setting. I just leave it like this, or I put it on wrap. Wrap is for the next episode because that's a little bit harder. But for now, I just want to make the point that if you have a horizontal situation like this, where you have more than 3 items, I would say, in most cases, you would have to jump to wrap. So only use this default setting if you have 2 or 3 items on a row. 2 is okay, you know, because with 2, you don't have to mess around with the width. It still looks good on tablet. As you can see, still looks good. And on mobile, they will automatically wrap anyways, so that is fine. So far, we have been working with elements that all have the same width. So for example, a situation like this, where the 3 boxes all have the same width. But what if you have a situation where that is not the case? For example, with the heading over here and this text. This text is a lot wider than this heading. Or a situation like this, where you have a block and this maybe can be the same size, but there is a space in between. How do you deal with that, even when this is a 1 row design? If you have a situation like that, you can use my resource about Flex Grow that I made for a video on YouTube. I've adjusted it a little bit. This is the most updated version. In the next episode, we're going to talk about this a little bit more, but right now I want to focus on this part, because it will happen that you are in your design and then you're like, hey, wait, how wide is this? So how wide should it be in Elementor? You can, of course, just click on the element and then be like, okay, this is 455 in pixels, but it's smarter to use percentages for everything. Because let's say that later in the website you decide to change the main container width. Then with percentages, you can just leave everything. But if you've used pixels, then you have to adjust everything. So working with percentages is better also for responsive. So do not just copy your pixel val from your design file and then go into your Elementor and give it a pixel width in the width tab over here. We're going to do it a little bit smarter. So let's say that we want to create this situation. Let's do that. We're first going to drag in the widgets that we need. So for example, a heading and a text widget. It's the other way around. I'm going to change that in the editor. Let's give it a style. How to set up all of your global fonts will be discussed in a future episode, so don't worry about that now. I'm just going to copy it to show you how you can align it. Okay, so right now we have this situation where this widget takes up a lot of space and it takes up way too much space. I'm also going to copy the text real quick. Okay, so now we need to play around with the width settings in order to make it work. So that's when you can use the Flex Grow template. And this is based on the 12 column grid. So when you go to your design file and you open your grid, you will see that this layer is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 columns wide. So then you go over here, 5 columns, that will be 41% of the width. So let's just try that. We're going to go to Elementor and we're going to go to Advanced. Now we need to click on Custom and then make sure it's on percentages, put it on 41. Now it still doesn't look like our design. Why not? First of all, is because I chose the wrong title. I just discovered that. So if you go to style, it's on title 3, but in my design, I have used title 2, so it was not the same size, but now it still doesn't work. This one is still pushing that one out. And that is because if you want to use the grow feature on this layer, you have to give it some width. Otherwise, it will grow too much. So you have to give it some width and then let it grow. So if you go to custom, and for example, even give this 1%, doesn't really matter, but I would recommend do something bigger. We use 40 over here. So let's just use 50 over here. Now there's still a gap and now you can put it on grow. And then it will grow to the end of the container, giving you the exact design that you want. As you can see, it breaks at the exact same moment. This is the same on tablet mode. So let's go to tablet mode. We can, of course, change the width over here if we want to another value. Make sure it's on percentages because sometimes it switches to pixels for some reason. You can change it, and as long as this value doesn't become bigger than the value that I've set up over here, then it will work. So for example, I can put something like this. I could even, if I want to, increase the gap in between and play with it like that. And then on mobile, of course, you want to go back to full width and also make sure that the gap is back to 20, otherwise it looks weird. But now you can see how you can get a pixel perfect design, exactly the same as your design file, if you use a combination between the values I have over here and then put the other item on grow, but make sure it has some width, otherwise it doesn't grow as you want it. So you only need to use these values if they don't have the same width, or you have a situation like this. Let's also try that for now. We have an empty container over here. We need 3 widgets on the left, so let's add in another container, like that. So let's first add in an image, like that. Make sure that this one is on row, and then also let's add another container. All right, so now we have an image and a container. Gonna quickly put in some widgets. Make sure it's aligned in the middle. And now you can do the same trick if you want to. So this box is 5 columns wide. That will mean it's also 41%. So you could go to your container, make sure you're not in the main container, but in the right container. Make sure that your container is on full width and then put it on 41%. You can also do that for your image. Custom, 41%. And then you can go into your main container and, for example, just use space between. So with a combination of using percentages and sometimes combining it with grow, you can create layouts with gaps and layouts where the 2 items on the same row don't have the same width. I hope that this cleared some things up on how to create a pixel perfect design for designs on one row. Let's now move on to the more difficult part, which is wrapping, which is very essential for designs with multiple rows. So for something like this. because this is quite challenging. I will see you in the next episode.